Hey, Lifespans class, this is Dr. Yang again. Coming to you for chapter 16, again, middle adulthood, social and personality development. And I want to start off by saying, please take a look at Harvey. There's a couple cool things on there that are going to kind of further cement some of these concepts. One is a TED Talk, and it is a cool conversation to just get you thinking. And it's about just what makes life meaningful. And when you get to the end of your life and you look back, just what are the things that provided for a long, meaningful life, as well as when you're in your early 20s. Several people were interviewed and they were asked, what are your goals? What you think is going to make you happy so that you could live your best life and have a happy life? What will determine whether you're successful? And what are the goals that when you get to the end of your life, you want to look back and see how will you determine if you lived your best life? And interesting enough, the results showed that money, I want to make a lot of money because money will bring me happiness. The second one was I want to be famous. I want to be infamous for something. And those two tended to be what most young people said that their ultimate goals were. However, if you watch the TED Talk and you get to as you go through and you get to the end, you're going to realize that they've been given multiple reasons for why, what determined if someone was successful during their midlife between 40 and 60 was more based upon relationships and the relationships of if they were meaningful. And although the sandwich generation, as they're caring for their children as well as caring for aging parents, although there is stress there, those also prove that there were meaningful connections. And when relationships tended to be towards the end of life, how one determines whether or not they lived their good life and they were successful, it was based off of whether or not they had sorry, my dog came for a visit, whether or not they had meaningful relationships. And that tended to be how they determined if they lived their best life and if they had regrets or if they felt connected. And one of the biggest things that was of concern and affected their mental state as well as their physical state was whether or not the individual was lonely. So when they were connected and they had aspects that drew them into other people and relationships, it fueled them with purpose. So that is an interesting thing that you'll want to see. Watch that TED Talk. It just kind of gets you thinking. There's also a link on there about violence. Sometimes when stress comes in, if it's not managed well, and you begin to have financial concerns, health concerns, sometimes unfortunately that can lead to violence or abuse. So there's also some interesting links that you can look at that as well. Turning 40 can be a challenge. Is there such a thing as between the 40 and 50s, you hear about this, is there such a thing as midlife crisis? Normative crisis mode or life events mode, this is two perspectives. This is just normal. This is a normal part of life. I saw it coming and I'm going to handle this just the way I handled everything else in my life, and you just take it head on. And there's a life events model of certain things as you transition through different stages, how you'll approach that. And some you'll view as this is negative and I don't want to see this coming. And some people view just overall aging as a negative thing, while others view it more in the light of if I've done things well and I've been successful in my life, that my life has been meaningful and full of purpose, and it's a positive light. Erikson stages: generative versus stagnation. Generative refers to the contribution to family, community, work, and society. So when you look at your life, do I feel full of purpose, or am I living with regrets? I dropped out of school. I should have finished. I turned down that job and that could have been my dream job. I got sidetracked. I married the wrong person. Now I'm on my second marriage and I don't know if this one is right either. That's more following into the stage of stagnation. And it occurs when there's a lack of psychological success during the stage. So, was I successful at work? In my career? Was I successful in marriage? Parenting? Do I feel like I raised responsible citizens that are contributing part of society, or do I feel like I didn't? Are you living with regrets in areas that's stagnation, or do I feel very positive? I'm volunteering, I'm contributing to society, I poured my heart and soul into my children, and now I feel like they're contributing to society. I'm taking care of my parents. I feel like I did whatever job I've done. I feel like I've learned a skill or whatever career it is. I feel like that I have poured into that and I've obtained a level of expertise in that. So that would be the side of generativity, and these are Erikson stages during 40 to 65 during middle adulthood. Proposed keeping the meaning versus rigidity occurs between 40 and 50, 45 and 55, dealing with acceptance and adaptation. Can I adapt? Can I adapt to a change of income? Can I adapt to a change in what my kids are doing that I had hoped that they would follow this path and then now they're over here? Can I adapt to my greatest source of support was my parents and now they're aging and they need me? There's a role reversal, and can I adapt to that? And that is George Vaillant. That's his perspective that you can see there. There's also Gould's transformation in adulthood. It's a series of stages. You don't settle down till you're about 43 years old because you're in this little bit of a rat race. You're trying to somewhat pull a family together. You're trying to get into a career. You're trying to figure out where you're going to live, what neighborhood you're going to have, what cars you're going to drive. Are you going to be able to afford a vacation? What school should your kids go to? Should you live in the same state, town where your parents live? Who's going to take care of them? You have a lot of things, and then you come into your 40s and you're kind of forced to step back and evaluate the situation, and you're not in that young parent mode. Now you kind of start to level out. You see maybe through your perspective of a little clearer lenses as you mature. Levinson's Seasons of Life, there are 4 stages, universality applications. You can look at that. A midlife crisis, stage of uncertainty. Research does not support a widespread midlife crisis event, but it's typically, for all the reasons we've been discussing since we've been covering 15 and 16, you can see that there's a lot happening in this rather lengthy stage of midlife. So a midlife crisis naturally kind of comes when, even we've talked about the change in hormones, we've talked about the change in role reversal in some sense, and the force to be adaptable in different situations. This is also when you're going to come that there's 25-year-olds entering the workforce and you're still trying to figure out, you want to be known as the expert in the field, and you want value and you want worth and you want to be seen for your contributions that you've given over the past several years. Happiness increases with age. This is a Gallup poll study that was done. It's an older study, but it has been repeated, and it produced similar results as well. I believe it was in 2014. It was also, I'll get that date on here. The global measure, people start out at 18 feeling pretty good about themselves. Then apparently life begins to throw curveballs, and you have to kind of tread on some pretty rough waters sometimes. So you can feel worse until you hit about 50 sometimes. And at that point, there's a sharp reversal, and people tend to be happier sometimes. Not all the time, obviously. By the time they're 85, you're going to find, we'll say this for the next lecture, but you're going to find generally you can kind of resort back to hopefully taking care of yourself and finding some interests, some things, some hobbies, some things, volunteering, some things that can fulfill you as a person, because you're not so concerned on young kids in the home or different things. So you can pursue those interests, hopefully, that fulfill you. Happiness social clock is a psychological timepiece that records the major milestones in one's life. This is an interesting slide that you can look at. Big five personality traits. This is, again, some information that's more nice to know. You don't have to go too deep into this. But also I wanted to share, there is a resource on chapter 16 that you can see. And it kind of talks about having that conversation, or that difficult conversation. Because during this stage, as we shift from, raising kids, young family, to we kind of shift into, as we're edging toward the end of middle adulthood, more into 60-ish and on up, we need to have some of those conversations, those healthy conversations about what does death look like? What does the process of dying look like? Generally, most people will prefer to die at home, although they want that stage to take place at home, although that's not realistic in a lot of cases. But having some conversations before you get to that point are always healthy. So these are some stages where during this stage, those conversations may be uncomfortable, but it's going to be beneficial. And an interesting thing of humanity that we talk about, when you come into the world as a newborn, you're totally dependent on others, incontinent for your food, for all your needs, all your basic needs, you're dependent on others for that. This somehow, then, when you're nearing the death and dying stage in older adulthood, you're going to resort back to that. You're going to resort back to, many times, dependent on people for incontinence, for food, for nutrition, for your basic needs. And sometimes that's looked upon as a loss of dignity, but it's in fact, it's point at which what makes us human in humanity. So it can be argued that humanity, we begin as a newborn with humanity requiring on the needs of others. And that's also how we will end our life as well, requiring independent on the needs of others. And that's forming those relationships that are so important to each of us as humans, that we have that connection with others. And it's okay to rely on each other. And when you're in different stages, you're able to care for others. And as generations go on, you can see how we switch roles and we take care of others. So that stage of humanity. But watch that video that you'll see on there, because it's just having that tough question. What do you want that to look like? Some individuals, I'll take whatever experimental treatment I need. I'll take chemotherapy. I'll take radiation. I will take there's stem cell treatment research out there. Sure, yeah, I'll take that as well. Anything to prolong the inevitable, anything to prolong death, anything, the dying process. When interviewed, people, they don't want to be in pain. They want to be surrounded by people that they love in familiar places. Different things that you'll see on the interview, aspects that are important to individuals. So that is, it's kind of an interesting documentary. So try to watch that and just see the different aspects of how having the conversations before are sometimes unpleasant to discuss, but also important. Family and friends in middle age are very important. Marriage and divorce, sometimes you marry early, you marry young. Sometimes that's the perfect setup. Sometimes it's not. Some people never marry, and some people marry and wish they hadn't. There's all aspects. But you will see that here. A lot of times you can see blended families in the middle stage. And then there's different things that can either be the benefits as well as the stressors. And obviously no life is perfect. And hopefully there can just be that balance and that ability to adapt as you go through. Many couples refer to their spouse as their best friend. This is evident as we're talking about when they said, when you look back, what was the most important and the most meaningful? It's generally not how much money you made or what you had. The most meaningful is relationships, and many times it'll be the spouse or the children, as well as some people don't have those connections and they've been able to form their family out of friends, and that is meaningful as well. Empty nest syndrome is parents feeling a sense of unhappiness or worry, some obviously loneliness. It can lead to even depression, departure of kids. This is very evident to some, while others they considered a new chapter in an exciting stage. Research evidence suggests this is generally temporary feeling. If this lingers, this is an individual that would want to get help and additional resources. Boomerang children are known as those children that go out. They go out for either a job or they go to college and then they come back. It may be grown children that go out and try to live on their own, and for whatever reason they need support, there's divorce, whatever, health issues, or there's a loss of job, they need financial support, they end up coming back home. That's a boomerang child. And sandwich generation, we have already mentioned. Couples who must fulfill the needs of both their children and their aging parents. There's a role reversal there and the adaptation of taking on a new role. Becoming a grandparent comes in this stage as well. Can be perceived as exciting. Many people report that it is. Involved, actively engaged, and have influence over their lives. And this can be either distant or local. They can still have meaningful relationships. Family violence. There's a hidden epidemic here. Spousal abuse, the most dangerous place to be is in your own home. If that is the case, a lot of times even when you go to seek healthcare, OBGYN, any of this, you'll get a form and information on if there's domestic violence, because this is kind of something that people don't often reveal. They don't know a safe place where they can either go or report. Cycle of violence, you can see that. Tension builds, especially we're in this pandemic. There's people quarantined. We're in smaller spaces where typically we would go out for the day to work, to whatever that we did, and then we'd come home. Now, a lot of times there can be kids not going to school. There can be parents that are not going, and if there's financial pressures of loss of job or different things with this quarantine can add to the stress and the cycle of violence. Factors that increase the likelihood of abuse are all obviously going to be, as we mentioned, financial. There can be health concerns. There can be disagreements on how we handle the role reversal and taking care of our aging parents or our children. Mom thinks that the boomerang child should come home while dad says no, he's not. And if you've got a blended family, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle our financial pressures that we're feeling right now? And now all of a sudden you have a new diagnosis, and we're adding that to the table. We got to figure out how to eat healthier. We've got to figure out when to fit in exercise, and just all of those moving parts in your ability or inability to adapt to those are going to determine how you transition through this stage. Child abuse, obviously for younger, middle age, you can see if there's a single parent family, the stressors there. If there's a high level of marital conflict, stressful environments, again, low socioeconomic status, there's more pressures oftentimes that you're dealing with. So just being self-aware and being mindful is going to be important. Cultural issues, you can see, there's not too much you need on that slide. Work and leisure, trying to find a balance. Career at midlife is not guaranteed. Occupational success may be less desired, but job satisfaction generally increases with age. So you may feel a sense of satisfaction because hopefully you've made a difference in your career, and you look back on that as you're nearing the end of midlife. American workers, we do not have a very good balance as far as, now it's a little bit different. We've been on quarantine, so we've had more time, but generally we don't take as good of care of ourselves during these middle adulthood. It seems that we don't, or spurred into taking care of ourselves once we have a diagnosis. Once we find out we've had high blood pressure or diabetes, then we decide that we're going to take care of ourselves. Once we know we have high stress or whatever that cause, we need to obviously alleviate that. We can't go long term with that stress, so we have to kind of find a fine line and a balance between work and leisure. Middle-aged woman, more women are working and in more high-powered positions than ever before. Then burnout is a situation that occurs when highly trained professionals experience dissatisfaction, disillusionment and frustration, weariness from the jobs. We are seeing this in nursing right now. This is tremendous job security with being a nurse in the midst of a pandemic. However, when there's limited PPE and there are limited, we already have a nursing shortage, we are seeing that at some point a nurse can't just give and give and give and give. They have to have time to be able to refill their tank as well in order to be able to give and take care of their patients and their families and all their responsibilities as well. So burnout has never been to the level that it's been for healthcare professionals, because they're being taxed to the max right now, but other professions as well. Unemployment, anything that's a dashing of a dream, anything that stages where maybe you're not performing up to the level of a 25, 30-year-old coming out of college. There's new ways to do things and transitioning there. It's harder if for some reason you do lose your job in midlife. It's harder in certain career paths. It's going to be harder to find another job, because many companies may think we're going to take the one fresh out of school because we have a longer time with them. We're not going to take somebody that's nearing retirement generally. So that's something to think about. Having to reapply for a current job. Also, another example would be with nursing with this as well. I can be working in midlife, middle adulthood. I can be working and they bring in a new grad that comes in, makes the same amount or more as I am, maybe with 20 years of experience. And this, in this case, would not be acceptable with some nurses as well. Or if you have to cut positions, sometimes they'll try to ask some to go into early retirement, and you can feel that sense of what used to be your purpose to not have that. You may feel that that's a dashing of a dream. Switching and starting careers in midlife, updating a skill, computer literacy and technology is something that can either be a great asset or it can be very difficult. Career changes are anticipated to become the rule rather than the expectation for next generation. And leisure time, 35 to 40 hours is generally a work week, and 70 hours of leisure per week is on average. That's typically not going to be the case. Okay, this can be what we do see even in other countries. You know, they fit work in around their leisure, whereas tends to be in the U.S., our work comes first, and then if we have time, we fit in the leisure. 15 hours of screen on average, but many more activities outside of the home. These are all things that we want to get to. Board of directors or volunteer positions, these are going to give self-worth. I've got all this expertise now, let me pour it in to those coming behind me. Again, this slide is what our optimal would be for optimal health during this stage. So that concludes chapters 15, 16 for middle adulthood. And I hope you get an idea and just a little sense of feeling what it would be like to be in the shoes of a middle adulthood. And as you care for individuals in this stage, or as you do your reflective paper on Erickson's, and you're thinking about the generative versus the stagnation of that fulfillment, in that you're plugged in most areas you feel like you're living with purpose, a sense of purpose and pride, versus living more with regrets, with stagnation. So hopefully you can, this may be a parent, this may be a neighbor, this may be a coach, whatever the case may be, you can use that to write your paper this week. If you have any questions or any concerns, please reach out to me. I am always happy to help. Have a super week, guys.